My name is Simon Mundie, and this is the Life Lessons podcast. This conversation is with Alex Honnold, the greatest rock climber in the world and the star of the Oscar-winning film Free Solo. Alex was the first man to climb El Capitan, a sheer 3,000-foot cliff without ropes or any safety equipment of any kind. It was described as one of the greatest athletic feats of any kind ever by the New York Times, and like anyone who's watched the film, I would have to agree. In this episode, we talk about fear and how to overcome it. I hope you enjoy.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
Sometimes I like to give a guest who comes on the podcast a present. And I watched your film yesterday, and there was no way I was not going to be bringing you a present.
Oh, yeah.
So now, you're not the easiest to buy for, because I know that you are vegetarian and you don't drink alcohol and you don't drink caffeine. Is that right?
That's all true, yeah.
So you're not this. So this is. I'm not sure if this present's going to land, but I forked out on some swanky chocolates.
That's the perfect. I love chocolate.
Oh, your face lit up.
Yeah,
I'm over the moon.
I was hoping it was something simple, something delicious. This might be my breakfast. I might eat this right now.
Go for it. I'd be delighted if you did. I am over the moon to have you with me. Even just walking through the office just now, obviously I sort of come through this way with some big sporting stars, and you can see people's faces kind of like incredulous, some of them. And obviously a lot of people here don't know who you are. But I think if they did know who you are and what you've done, their reactions would have been a little bit more on the extreme side. So you are a free solo climber.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, I would call myself a climber.
Just a climber.
Who also free solos.
Okay. And you climbed a 3,000-foot vertical cliff without ropes. And that's what this film is all about.
Yeah.
And that 3,000-foot cliff is
El Capitan. In Yosemite.
Okay. So can you just describe like what that looks like?
I mean, you really just have to see it, particularly in person. But yeah, like you said, it's a 3,000-foot vertical granite wall, so it's a sort of white rock. It's light colored. It's striking. It's sheer. It's grand in the real sense of the word. It's it's awe-inspiring.
It's significantly taller than any skyscraper in the world.
Well, yeah, actually, the Burj Khalifa is almost as tall.
Right.
So the tallest building in the world is almost as tall. But the tallest building in the world is, basically twice as tall as any of the other big skyscrapers in the world.
Right, okay.
It's more than twice as tall as the Empire State Building.
Okay, yeah.
Let's say.
Okay.
So, so like the Shard here in London is tiny compared to...
peanuts.
Yeah,
so, I mean, I've climbed the Empire State Building, and I've stood on top, and I stood nowhere near the edge.
Yeah, you were at the first third.
Yeah. And you get the wind whistling round, even at that height, right?
Yeah, it depends. Actually, in somewhere like Yosemite National Park, where El Cap is, there actually isn't a huge difference between the wind at the top or the bottom. Okay. It's like you're kind of in the mountains, and if it's a windy day, it's a windy day, and if it's not, I think with buildings you experience something slightly different, because at the bottom of a city you're just not necessarily experiencing what's going on in the atmosphere, and then 1,000 feet above it you're sort of out of the city proper. Okay. But in the mountains it's a little bit different.
To climb El Cap, as you did, without ropes, it's been described as a quantum leap forward. So even for free solo climbers, so people who do this professionally, who do this all their lives, if the thought of doing what you did, even to them, is like insane.
That's fair, yeah. I mean, so for me, it was sort of an incremental step in a way. I mean, it was still a sort of big step, but I've done a lot of other free solos that are similar in size and scope. But the thing is that those were all the first time that they'd ever been free soloed as well. So I mean, basically when I became a professional climber in 2007, since then I've been sort of taking small steps forward in free soloing, every year, kind of culminating in El Cap. And so for me personally, it felt like lots of little steps, and then and El Cap was a lot harder than several of the other things I'd done, but I was already like kind of out there, and I think that like you said, that's all sort of beyond what other people have been doing right now.
Like we said, I mean, painting the image of climbing anything without ropes, but particularly things like El Cap with sheer drops, it's an incredibly, incredibly dangerous sport, and that's borne out by the number of people who have died doing it. And a lot of them, and there was even the film itself was dedicated to Uli, who died just a few months before the film came out.
So that kind of thing is more complex. It's more nuanced than even the film might make it seem. Because I mean, Uli died mountaineering, and so he was on a snowy slope and basically fell down a steep, mountainside. Very different than a cliff face where you're basically free falling. I mean, it's impossible to know why he fell because he was alone, so he may have just slipped, but he more likely was probably hit by falling snow or ice or rock or something, because basically when you're in the mountains, things are happening, things are changing. You could have been hit by an avalanche. Whereas rock climbing, like I was doing in somewhere like Yosemite, that's a really static and unchanging environment, or relatively unchanging. There are fewer objective hazards. So, I don't know, basically it's complicated. And some of the other people mentioned in the film as having died, in the mountains. A couple of them died base jumping. A couple of them, it's basically they died in sort of peripheral activities. They weren't actually free soloing, and they definitely didn't just fall off a cliff. Base jumping, I suppose, is also falling off a cliff, but it's intentionally falling off the cliff with a parachute. But then they had accidents.
Do you do any base jumping?
No, 100% not.
Because
because it's way too risky.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the ways you can, if we're diving into risk, so base jumping has an absurdly high level of fatalities and things happen base jumping, but the thing is that they happen as frequently for beginners as they do for experts. So like the best base jumpers in the world seem to die at the same rate as the worst base jumpers in the world. It kind of shows that it's a fundamentally dangerous activity, and there's just this base level of risk. Basically you're always rolling the dice, it seems like. Whereas with free soloing, my favorite statistic is that no free soloist has ever died doing anything cutting edge. Like nobody has ever, some people, lots of people have died free soloing, but they mostly die in sort of mundane, easy climbs, basically if they're complacent. But nobody's ever died doing anything that was actually the hardest thing that they had done. So, nobody has died pushing the limit of the sport. They just sort of die in accidents because they're, it's hard to know why. And also, beginners probably die at a greater rate than experts with climbing anyway. So I don't know. It's just sort of a...
And I understand why you would say that when doing these sort of edge-pushing climbs like you've done, wouldn't be as dangerous, well, not as dangerous, but wouldn't be as statistically fatal, for example, because of the focus that you have to have.
And that's kind of the whole point of the film, is showing the 2 years of preparation and showing how much, how dedicated I am to the pursuit of that particular climb. So by the time I do the climb, I've been training for 2 years. I'm totally ready for it.
So we painted the picture of El Cap, but I do encourage anyone to look at it or watch this film, because I was watching it in the office just yesterday. And the people around me were like definitely thinking I was behaving very oddly, because it was on a small screen. I was looking through my fingers at times. My stomach was going. I was gasping. You talked about your sort of preparation. So you'll say it took you 2 years to get to that point. And there was an aborted attempt a year previously, right?
Yeah, 6 months before, yeah.
Right, okay. And that's what we saw in the film, where you just went up and were like, okay, I'm not feeling it today.
Yeah, exactly.
And then June 2017...
Yeah, June 3rd, yeah.
Yeah, so you'd been building to this moment, and what amazed me was, there was all this anxiety, and obviously your girlfriend, who is clearly like an angel.
She is.
Like she is. She was, super anxious. You were too, and then the morning of it, boom, you could just tell you were just more relaxed. And just the change in your persona and your energy on the morning or the day before, I think it was just crazy. So, what was going through your head?
That specific, a lot of times you can be, worried about something, stressed about something forever, but then once you finally make the decision and sort of flip the switch, like this is happening, once you commit 100%, then it suddenly becomes pretty relaxing, because the decision's been made. There's no more hesitation. There's no more doubt. There's no, it's happening, and then you just see it through. And then,
so for you, then at that point when you made that decision and you knew there was no way back in your own head, the anxiety just fell away, and it was just like, okay.
Well, you've basically made a conscious decision that there's no more second guessing. There's no more hesitating. Like, this is now happening. So, I think up to that point, you can keep going back and forth. Like, are you, am I sure I'm ready? Like, is this really something I want to do? But once you decide I'm ready, then you move forward.
Right. Okay. Another thing that tickled me was like how relaxed you were, and yet your crew were just absolutely...
But that's pretty normal, though. The film crew is all horrified, but it's because, as you saw yesterday, watching free soloing is it's hard to watch. And I think that's always true, because, as the actual soloist, I know how comfortable I feel, how confident, how prepared I am, but anybody watching doesn't really know what it feels like on the inside. So it looks super scary.
So El Cap it's got broken down into these, he's got these great names.
Yeah, every climb is broken into pitches, which are little sections.
Okay.
And so El Cap is broken into about 30 pitches. And then sort of the key pitches have names to them.
And the one that obviously where I was gasping at my most embarrassing in the office yesterday is called the boulder problem.
Yeah.
So where you basically, you're 2,000 odd feet in the air.
Yeah.
and you're essentially stuck to the side of a sheer rock side by like the smallest ledges that are almost can't see them with your eye. They're even close up.
I mean, the footholds are probably the size of the edge of a coin, for real. I mean, the footholds are really, really small. Or maybe like the width of a pencil or something, like a pen.
Yeah, sure.
It's like, no, actually not a pen. That's too big.
No, that is too big.
Yeah, it's like it is more like a coin, probably. Actually, the handholds are probably the edge of a pencil, maybe.
Yeah, sure. So can I just have a quick look at your hands? I was intrigued at these. Yeah. Oh wow! I mean, look at those things. Crikey, O'Reilly, they are special.
They're just beautiful hands.
They are beautiful. They are well formed, beautiful hands. So yeah, back to the boulder problem. So there you are, and to get over this, around this, or across this, or
across. It's like a
deal
vertical,
with it. Yeah.
You
had two choices. One that involved the leap. Is that right?
Yeah.
And when it came to the moment, I was like, he's not going to leap. Please don't leap. And you didn't leap. Thank the Lord.
No. I mean, and I say that during the preparation. I mean, I always considered the leap completely out of the question.
Right,
because, you don't want to know that your whole life is coming down to this one moment where you're flying through the air. And if you don't catch the edge, you're going to die. I mean, that's just all a little too extreme.
Yeah. So what you did decide to do was this so it's like a karate kick sideways. So this karate kick, so you've been preparing for 2 years, so doing sort of various stretches to get your leg in a position where you could even manage it physically.
Yeah, well, basically, the more flexible I was, the more comfortable the kick felt.
Right.
Because basically, if your hamstrings are really tight and you can't make much of a stretch, then you sort of have to fall into the corner. Whereas the more you can stretch, the more you can place it there statically.
And this was basically the make or break moment. Certainly it was painted like that.
Yeah, so the boulder problem is the hardest part of the whole route, and then the karate kick is sort of the culmination of the boulder problem. So, I mean, it really is like, this is the moment.
And I don't want to ruin the film for anyone who hasn't seen it. But,
having me on already did. It's like, obviously I survived, so.
He made it.
The
karate kick made it. Yeah. But that will not stop the level of anxiety that you will feel at that moment. So, you made that, and then from there on in, just massive grin on your face, basically run up the next 1,000 sheer feet of rock.
Kind of. I mean, there's still a bit of hard stuff above that, the enduro corner that they show in the film, and then the traverse. Those are still actually, I mean, from the top of the boulder problem to the summit, done just totally by itself, would still be among the hardest things that I'd ever free soloed.
Yeah.
But even though it's only 1/3 of the total climb. But yeah, so much easier than the boulder problem that I felt pretty confident.
So you got up to the top, and you talk about experiencing perfection. You've conquered El Cap, which is, to me, like, I can't think of another achievement by anyone in the world ever that's quite that impressive in many ways. I genuinely cannot think of anything anyone else has done. I mean, okay, maybe fly to the moon, but at least they got a spaceship.
I think flying to the moon is probably a lot more dangerous.
Yeah, but that's a team effort. You're on your own.
Well, in some ways, that's what makes it more dangerous. The thing about free soloing is that because it's all on me, I can just work on it. And there's no pressure. There's no time pressure. So I can just work on it until I feel comfortable and make sure that it's the right day, make sure that it's the right conditions. And, in theory, I could have just kept working on it indefinitely, until that perfect moment. Okay.
So I just want to contrast your experience on El Cap with what happened to you on the Half Dome.
Yeah. So it is sort of a classic contrast. I mean, so I free soloed Half Dome in 2008, and at the time it was the most significant thing that I'd free soloed, and it was sort of big deal in the climbing industry or climbing world. Yeah, so that climb I specifically didn't prepare for. So earlier in the year, I had free soloed something else called Moonlight Buttress, which was also sort of groundbreaking at the time. And for that, I had put quite a bit of rehearsal in, or what seemed like, actually at the time, it was only 2 days, but it felt like a lot of rehearsal. I basically memorized the whole route. And it was a very simple route anyway. It's like one crack that goes up this buttress. And so I felt like I'd put too much work into Moonlight. And so for Half Dome, I sort of intentionally chose not to prepare in the same way. Also, partially because Half Dome is much bigger and it's much higher off the valley floor, so it's hard to get up there, and so it would have been really hard to work on anyway because it's too big a scale. It's a 2,000-foot face, so it's just hard to manage. At the time, I didn't even own 2,000 feet of rope. I didn't know how you work on something like that, and so I figured that it was more sporting to just go up there and have an adventure and see how it went, and so I did, and didn't go that well. It went poorly, and so it was too much of an adventure.
There was a moment that you spoke about where you've described it as like waking up. You woke up into this, oh my Lord, I'm really in a pickle here.
Or it's more like it's like you have a nightmare. Yeah. But yeah, there was a moment up high on Half Dome. I mean, so I had many little experiences of climbing up the wall that were sort of fraying me mentally a little bit. You know, it was all sort of coming apart a little bit. It was unraveling a little bit. It's like, this is all kind of scary, but I was kind of holding it together. And then up high, basically the last hard move on the whole route, there's like a bald slab of, it's just a smooth, less than vertical wall. So it means there are no real holds no handholds to use, just like little tiny nubs that you can stand on with your feet. So it's like all your weight is balanced over your feet, and there's nothing to hold. It feels very insecure. And I basically had to trust one more foothold and like stand up on this nothingness to reach to sort of the next good hold. And then from there to the top is another 100 feet, but quite a bit easier. And, and I just started to hesitate, and then sort of started to panic, and, you know, didn't trust the foot, and then started to think maybe I should use my left foot, or maybe I should use the foot over here, or maybe I should try the smaller one that's out to the other side. Like, maybe that'll be okay. So I sort of try a couple different things, and, you know, I'm standing there in the middle of this blank wall, slowly getting more tired, thinking like, oh no, you know, what's going to happen? And then, and then I ultimately had to sort of compose myself and make the move, and, you know, I didn't fall, so it worked out okay. But it was all sort of horrifying at the time.
And obviously that completely altered the way you prepared for El Cap. You told a really nice story in your TED Talk where, so you've done that, and you can hear people talking on the other side.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing with Half Dome, is that so this whole time that I'm having this crazy experience, I'm maybe 100 feet vertically below the summit, and Half Dome is actually this crazy mountain where the summit like juts out like a visor. It's called the visor. And so you can occasionally see people's heads peering over the visor, and they're looking straight down the 2,000 feet, like all the way to the ground. And so, you know, I can hear people all having a good time, and it sounds like a shopping mall or something above me, but I'm by myself having this crazy experience. Anyway, so I finally make the move, and I charge the rest of the way to the summit because it's much easier terrain. And so I basically sprint to the top, and I pop over the top, and I'm shirtless, and I'm like all pumped, and, you know, like, you know, like just had this crazy experience. And there are all these people, and normally when you top out, you know, with a partner, you have a rope and all this gear jangling, and people are like, oh my God, did you climb the face? That is so crazy. But this time I popped up and had nothing on me because, you know, I climbed without a rope and didn't get any reaction at all. And it was kind of like, you know, it's like you want to like tap somebody. Did anybody see that? You know, but they just think that you're a tourist because you're just like, oh, some shirtless dude hanging out by the side of Half Dome. And then I was walking down barefoot because climbing shoes are so tight and uncomfortable. And so then on the way down, that's when people are all like, did you hike up here barefoot? That's so crazy. Like, that's so hardcore. And you're like, no, like that is not the takeaway here.
See, that's like, almost the thought that was going through my head when we were walking through the office. I think, you know, people just unaware of, you know, what you've done. Okay, so the timescale's different. You just popped over the mountain, but still, you know, it's not that long ago since you climbed El Cap.
I hiked almost all the way down Half Dome. There are tons of people. It was crowded, and at the very bottom there were some like sort of runners, climbers coming up the other way, and they were like, you know, I'm walking down carrying climbing shoes, and I'm, you know, they were like, oh wow, did you free solo Half Dome? I was like, yes, like one person. You know, like, in fact, I did.
Right. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So we are talking about fear and risk.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about, like, what is the biggest risk that I've taken or that most people have taken? It's probably something like quitting a job.
I was immediately going to say driving or traffic or, you know, navigating. Because, I mean, if you talk about actual the risk of physical harm, like what's the closest you come to death? I mean, it's basically...
Purely from a statistical point of view.
Yeah,
sure. What feels like the biggest risk for most people, though, would be likely.
But I think that's actually the key thing talking about fear is to differentiate between, you know, real justified fear and then just vague anxiety. Yeah, because certainly changing jobs can feel like you're going to die. It can be super scary, and you're like, I don't know, it's so tense.
Yeah.
But the reality is that you're not in any danger. You know, it just feels that way because you're sort of projecting out, like, what if my career crumbles and what if I can't eat? I think the key to how scary it is whether or not you're actually in danger.
Right.
You know, and so...
You were in danger.
Well, no, that's kind of the whole point, is that with the 2 years of preparation, I didn't feel like I was in danger anymore.
Okay, you didn't feel like you were in danger, but you were still in danger.
Well, kind of, yeah. So I was in a very high consequence position, you know, meaning like had anything gone wrong, I would have died. But the likelihood of anything going wrong felt extremely small to me.
Right.
You know, it felt like close to zero.
Yeah, okay.
So to me, it didn't feel dangerous because I knew, you know, in the same way that walking on the sidewalk doesn't feel dangerous, you know, even though if you fell off the sidewalk in front of a bus, you would still die, but it doesn't feel dangerous because you know you won't fall off the sidewalk. Because, I mean, fear, you know, everybody should feel fear if they're in danger. Like, if there is an actual threat to their life, you should feel fear because that's warning you to behave in the right way.
There's this interesting part in the film where you have an MRI And the amygdala part of your brain, well, in your case, you were shown scary images when you were in the MRI.
Yeah.
And in most people, that would fire up the amygdala and they would feel fear. And they said, right, you basically have no...
Yeah, I had no activation.
No activation. Now, a lot of people have leapt to conclusions about this. Now, to some degree, clearly, then, you must be wired that way. To some degree.
Yeah, or maybe started slightly further down that path. I think that's the real takeaway.
Yeah, so you were a bit more down that path. But a lot of people say, oh, you're wired differently. But for me as well, it's the amount of rock climbing you've done, because you have to be so focused. It's like hardcore meditating. Like, you are so in the moment. You're so present. How many hours do you reckon you've spent climbing and totally focused while doing it?
Well, climbing, I don't know. I mean, 22 years now at, let's see, if I'm going 5 days a week, say at least 15 hours a week for 20 years. Okay. I'm like, I don't know, somebody do some quick math. Say 60 hours a month, 600 a year at least, so at least 12,000, 13,000,
okay.
14,000
all right, so
hours.
you're in almost yogi ballpark figures where your mind trains.
14,000 hours of climbing, that's so much. I could be totally wrong. That was all just, but that's a lot of freaking climbing.
That is a lot of climbing and a lot of focused attention that whole time, because you've described it as being like almost animal-like.
Though certainly not all of it is quite that intense,
sure.
Because a lot of climbing is at the climbing gym with your friends and you're having fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the thing that I thought about the amygdala was that that I've experienced so much fear in my life through climbing and through free soloing that I just require a certain level, a greater level of stimulus to have that response to trigger the amygdala.
Yeah,
because basically looking at pictures does not seem scary compared to actually hanging on the side of a cliff.
No, sure. Yeah. See, that's what I thought as well, and I think a lot of people have leapt to the conclusion, oh, you were born this way. Yeah,
people see that section in the film and they think, oh, he doesn't feel fear, and I'm like, I think that's the overly simplistic.
Yeah.
Because I know that I feel fear. I mean, everybody feels fear.
Yeah.
And I know how much my response has changed over 10 years, because the first time I free soloed was a lot more intense than even something like El Cap in some ways.
Yeah.
The first things that I free soloed, I was like, this is crazy. Like, it felt pretty intense.
Sure. Yeah, of course. And so I'm going to drop back a little bit now and sort of into like growing up, right? Okay. So for me, now I grew up in, let's say, like, I love my mum and dad, right? Yeah. But I grew up in, I would say, quite a volatile environment. And, it's definitely left its imprint on me. And you growing up, there were elements of what I heard about your story that really resonated. Yeah.
So the imperfect family life.
So your father, who sadly died when you were 19.
Yeah.
He was not an expressive man. And you talked about...
That's very fair, yeah.
And you talked about, there was not much hugging going on when you were growing up.
When that was with my whole extended family as well, for whatever reason. Because I was actually really close to my father's parents. My grandparents lived right near us.
Sure.
And then his older brother, so my aunt and uncle, also lived near us. And so the whole family was actually pretty... it's a really good family in a lot of ways. Sure. We see each other all the time, good holidays, everyone hangs out. And I'm still quite close to my aunts and uncles and my grandparents. But especially when I was a kid, there was no physical there was no hugging. It was all very... buttoned up type of, I don't know. And then it's just one of those quirks. And it's interesting because as adults now, I hug my aunt and uncle every time I see them, like, oh, good to see you guys. And now it all feels normal. But I'm like, why wasn't this normal 30 years ago? What the heck?
And your mother is a perfectionist. So she came out with that, what was it line?
Good enough isn't.
That's it. Good enough isn't. What a fabulous line that is.
The main thing, though, is that mom only spoke French to us as kids. So the main one was presque ne compte pas, almost doesn't count. Right. But so mom has only spoken French to me my whole life, and then I just spoke English.
To be clear, she's not French though.
Well, she was a French teacher, and she studied in France, and
right.
she loves French.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, she's into French, and she really wanted me and my sister to be cultured. I mean, mom still only speaks to me in French, so yeah, I mean, I understand it pretty well.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
C'était mon sujet favori à l'école.
Ah ouais.
Oui.
Ah, magnifique.
Merci. Ma première petite copine, c'était française.
Oh man, your accent's possibly worse than mine.
Okay. So your mum spoke to you in French, and she spoke as well about, right from an early age, treating you as little adults.
That's actually probably true. I don't think I've ever seen that, but yeah, that's a fair characterization.
Yeah.
So as an adult, and again, I think mom as an adult is a very loving woman, or much kinder. Yeah. But when we were young, I don't know, she's pretty stern.
Yeah.
And actually, and more than that, she was pretty driven on her own things. She was conducting an orchestra when I was a little kid, and she was writing books, and she was a professor and doing all these things, and very ambitious and driven, and And I think that my sister and I were just sort of, I don't know. I don't want to say in the way, but
she had a lot going on.
Yeah, exactly. And my parents were way into the sort of laissez-faire style of parenting, where I could disappear for a day at a time, have some outrageous adventure, come home, and nobody would even ask, like, "Oh, where were you all day?" And you'd be like, "Doesn't anyone want to know what happened today? It's crazy."
So you're used to kind of underwhelming reactions in many ways to your big achievements. Yeah. Do you think if you'd have been hugged more, you would have climbed El Cap?
Yeah, I don't know. No, I mean, honestly, it's really hard to know. I mean, had I been hugged a lot more, I think it's likely that I maybe wouldn't have gone down the whole path, Though, really, if we start to untangle it all, it's complicated because part of the only reason that I dropped out of university and sort of went climbing full time is because my father died.
Yeah.
And part of that was just the practical side because he left life insurance for my sister and I to finish college. And so I put that into bonds, and then that's sort of what allowed me to live on the road and go climbing for a couple years. And so it kind of gave me that the opportunity to climb for a few years without having to worry about what I was doing with my life. Because I was like, we'll see. And then I sort of became a professional climber. So it's like hard to separate all those things. Who knows how you wind up on your path, but I don't know. I know now I'm just sort of like, my childhood, huh? It's like, now I'll be sitting here thinking for a while.
It shapes all of us,
Yeah,
it really does. So we spoke about your amygdala and the way you trained it, as well as the fact that, there was probably some...
it's probably slightly less active than normal to begin with.
But when you were at university, so you had a year at university, and you were uncomfortable talking to strangers, so you'd go off and free solo climb. So you do experience fear or anxiety, perhaps, as you would put it.
Yeah. No, of course I experienced it. I mean, and when I was even younger, I was horrified of public speaking. And even as I became a professional climber, I was horrified of public speaking. The first few slideshows I gave, I was so gripped. And and actually I was just thinking about this on this particular trip to London that I've been on. I've been sort of noticing, I often will sort of skip meals or basically not eat because I don't want to interact. Basically, I don't want to go into some random shop and interact with some random person I don't know. And, I'm like, you know what? I'll just wait until dinner. Like, I don't need anything, for a few hours. And that still probably comes from the same place that it did at university, where I'm like, I basically had no friends because, I was going to University of California, Berkeley, which is a really big university, public, with, 50,000 students or something. And so the classes have 400 people in them. And so you don't necessarily know anybody, and you don't see the same people ever. And so you're never forced to make friends. And so I just, I went through the whole year at university without knowing anyone.
Do you find intimacy scary?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's all shown in the film pretty well too.
Yeah.
But it's also, the film shows, I guess the film is 2 years and then it's a year of post-production. But so I've been dating Sonny still for 3 years. And it's been a 3-year journey.
She is an angel.
Yeah, she's pretty amazing.
She's amazing.
She's helped, sort of guide me through.
You can see how you grew, and your relationship grew in that time. Like, you definitely...
Yeah, and certainly any relationship would grow because, we dated for 3 years. So at the beginning of filming, we had just met. And so obviously we're not that close because, we don't know each other. Now after 3 years, obviously we're quite close because we've lived together. But
quite close.
But yeah.
It is interesting that, we all feel fear in different ways and it all comes out in different ways. But so you've conquered your fear utterly in a superhuman fashion when it comes to rock climbing.
So fear, I keep saying that fear should be predicated upon danger. Are you actually in danger? What's the actual likelihood of something terrible happening to you? And so preparation is basically your way of lowering that likelihood of something terrible happening. And so, specifically about freestyling El Cap, as I prepared more, as I learned all the moves, I was less and less likely to fall off once I knew exactly how to climb it. And so the idea was to get it down to where it felt like zero. There was no way I was going to fall off that because it's so easy for me. Because, there are some climbs that I'm like, 100% I will never fall off of this.
Right.
Unless I have some catastrophic health thing or something, I have an aneurysm.
Okay. How does rain affect when you're...
Well, then you're hosed, yeah.
Yeah.
Then the bigger issue is actually wetness, like water coming out of the wall.
Right.
Because the ground table, like with the water table, basically the huge cliff, there's water inside the earth. And so depending on how much it's rained and snowed in the high country, there's water that basically is seeping out of the cliff.
Oh.
And so during my whole preparation, there'd actually been twice as the normal snowfall that year, that winter in California. It was kind of a crazy heavy winter. And so most of the time that I was preparing for the free solo, a lot of the cracks were actually quite wet. But I was sort of hoping that they would dry out before it got too hot and it was summertime. So it was like this narrow window of, not too hot, but dry that I was looking for. And so, and thankfully it did ultimately dry out. But, a lot of my preparation was spent working around, the wetness and the cracks and hoping that it would come together.
And the level of preparation that you have, so you talk about it, in your mind, you're rehearsing it the whole time. Mm-hmm. And, you're feeling what it would feel like on your foot.
Yeah, that's the part that I think is the real visualization. I mean, so a lot of that is the memorization, which I guess, you lump into visualization or mental training as well. But that's sort of the literal side of it, is the memorizing left hand, right hand, and just remembering the sequence. But then the real visualization is the sort of deeper level of the emotional, what will it feel like to be in that position? Emotionally, what will it be like to look down into the abyss while I put my foot onto this tiny, tiny little edge and then trust my life to it? Things like that. I mean,
scary.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's why I spent so much time thinking about those kinds of things, so that I wouldn't have some moment up on the wall where I suddenly experienced something that I'd never thought of before, that I'd never imagined.
Yeah.
You don't want to look down at your foot and think like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's what I'm going to step on.
Yeah, sure. Visualization's really always interested me, because a lot of people talk about the importance of it, particularly in sport, but also in so many other areas of life. It's always driven me crazy, because I feel like I'm not very good at it. I'm not very good at creating mental images. I'm not sure about it. It's something I struggle with. So have you always had that kind of...
I've always felt good at it. It's easy for me to construct worlds in my head and just imagine and...
Where you can feel and both sensations and emotions.
Yeah, and emotions and the tactile, the feeling, like what would it feel like to bite my fingers down on this little hole, be sharp on this one finger but not on the others. It's all just vivid imagination, I guess.
Vivid imagination, okay. So if anyone like me who's not very good at it, would you give any tips on how to nail visualization? Because clearly it was one of the most integral things for you.
I mean, honestly, just hearing you say that is the first time it's occurred to me that maybe some people can't imagine things in the same way. Really? Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Because I mean, everyone feels so normal inside their own head. I was just like, I assume that everybody can imagine the same way. Some of that might have to do with just because we were talking about childhood and all that stuff. I mean, so I was always into, fantasy and stuff, like reading Lord of the Rings or whatever, and like playing computer games as a kid, very dorky, very whatever. But I mean, it definitely comes with a sense of imagining worlds, or even reading, like the Dune trilogy or something as a kid, and like imagining this whole universe, like reading sci-fi, things like that. I mean, having a vivid imagination certainly does help in some ways if you're constructing this whole experience in your own head. Yeah. I mean, so... as another thing I wanted to say, I mean, so visualization is really, I think, the only way to practice for something that you can't physically practice. Yeah. And so, I mean, you have to just imagine it with as much detail as possible, because you want it to be as close to the real experience as possible. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're basically practicing, but it's just something that you can't honestly practice. I was never able to just schedule a 2-hour, like, now I'm going to practice free soloing in my head. So for me, I had to... I erased all the apps on my phone. I stopped answering email. I erased social media, all those things. So I had all this free time, sort of like empty space in my time. And then that sort of filled itself in naturally with visualization. And I felt like that was it was an easier way for it to just sort of naturally unfold, because I felt like the parts that I needed to spend more time visualizing, like say the boulder problem, the karate kick, things like that, I would sort of find myself drifting back to them over and over, because I needed to, because they were the really momentous parts of the climb, where you're like, that is going to be crazy, and I would just find myself thinking about it a lot.
Right. Okay. So once you got up there, how similar is it then? Once you're up there to the visualization,
it can be pretty similar. The other real strength of visualization is to imagine all the things that won't ever happen, or that you don't want to happen. I mean, so I was also visualizing what it would be like for my foot to slip and for me to fall to my death, or for me to do the karate kick but to miss it, and then have a moment of like, oh my God, my foot's in the wrong spot, but maybe I can do it with the foot in the wrong spot. I don't know, but then also ranging from what it'll feel like to pop over the top and be like, I am the man, like, this is awesome, and so, you want the full spectrum of experience, just so that none of it is a surprise when it actually happens. And honestly, even imagining what it would be like to walk up to the base and look up at the wall without a rope and be like, oh gosh, today's the day.
So are you able then to create emotion at will in your body? So you could create excitement, you could create happiness, sadness.
To some extent, except, I mean, I think that if I really imagine, something terrible happen, I can sort of create sadness. But the thing is, I feel like I experience all my emotions in a very stunted way. So, I often joke with my girlfriend that my whole emotional spectrum, say if most people operate from 1 to 10, I sort of operate between 4.5 and 6. I'm on a very narrow window in the middle that's always, right around 5. I'm sort of like, I feel pretty even keel.
Yeah.
And so, I might be able to visualize something. Like visualizing summoning El Cap gets me up to about a 5.3.
Okay.
I'm like, great success.
What would be your tangible tips then for when someone is having their metaphoric stood 2,000 feet up a sheer face?
My biggest tip is always people are so overwhelmed by fear. And I think it might be because people just don't experience that much real fear in their life. Like people just aren't afraid very often because life is very safe. If we're living in the Western world, life is safe. On a day-to-day basis, you don't get afraid. And so I think that most people, when they experience fear, it's this overwhelming emotion, this overwhelming sensation like, oh my God, what do I do? I'm afraid. And it all sort of falls apart. But the thing is, fear is a physiological response. Your body is basically sending you a signal in the same way that hunger is a signal or, sleepiness is a signal. Your body is basically telling you something. And whether or not you choose to act on it is up to you. And so, because you're feeling fear, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's your body telling you that it should be your body telling you that you're in danger. And then you can act on that how you see fit. But it doesn't need to rule you the way, like right now I'm experiencing hunger, but I'm not like, oh my God, I'm hungry. What do I do? Oh my God, I'm hungry. Yeah. I'm like, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to wait until we're done chatting and I'm going to go get food eventually, you know? And it's like, and it doesn't matter because I know that's fine.
Sure.
And, fear can definitely be the same way. But I think that people are so, unused to being afraid that, they just lack that level of nuance.
Yeah.
It's hard to parse out your fear.
Yeah. So it's a quote I quite like is any feeling is fine, but any reaction isn't.
Yeah, exactly. Feeling fear is, whatever, like that's just happening. How you react to it is on you.
Yeah. So when I do broadcasts, so when I come on the radio or whatever, like I'll often, particularly if I'm doing something live, feel that anxiety. And I remember early in my career, I'd be like, oh no, go away. And obviously that would amplify it.
Yeah, exactly.
But now I'm like, okay, it's there. Hello. Almost welcome it. Yeah. And then it can often change into excitement. Like you say, you learn to not be ruled by it.
Yeah. And certainly walking up to the base El Cap, I look up and you certainly have some butterflies as well, but you're like, oh, this is excitement. I'm so excited to do this thing that I've trained for so long.
Yeah.
Or you could be like, I'm so afraid, or whatever. Or you can just say, oh, I'm nervous, or I'm, anytime you're doing something that hasn't been done before, you're going to feel some kind of emotion because you're just like, oh, this is new.
Yeah.
Like it's fundamentally new.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Yeah. People will often not do something because of fear, quit a job, go and speak to a woman or a man who they might find all these different things.
We keep talking about fear, and to me, I always want to bring it back to, are you actually in danger?
Right.
Like, what is the actual downside of this? And so, a lot of those, social anxieties things, not wanting to, and certainly I've had a lot of issues with talking to attractive people in my life where I'm like, oh no, like I could never do that.
Yeah.
And it certainly feels like you're going to die, but realistically you're not going to die. And sometimes you just have to, and that's all practice too. Dating is so much practice. At some point you just have to force yourself to do the thing and just practice. You just go over and say hi because it gets easier to do that, the more you practice.
It's really interesting in this country that everyone gets quite drunk on a weekend. Often it's a real cultural thing, but part of that is undoubtedly down to social anxiety.
Yeah,
whatever other reason.
Doesn't that feel like cheating though?
Not when your whole nation's doing it.
Oh, it's still cheating.
I agree.
Because then you're not overcoming your fear. You're basically or you're not even managing. You're not even getting to the underlying issues. You're just sort of medicating them away, and that's not really I don't think that's the way forward.
But, okay, so someone who. To talk to someone of the opposite sex has to drink of a weekend, every weekend. The advice there is, you're cheating. Stop.
Yeah, well,
Push through
I don't know.
Fear.
Well, they should at least consider the idea that they should take on that aspect of their life in the same way that they would physical training or something like that, where they're like, this weekend I'm going to the pub. I'm not getting drunk. I'm going to force myself to speak to 3 strangers. Doesn't matter if, I get a number or not. Doesn't matter if I ever see them again, but I'm just going to practice talking to strangers. There's something to be said for just setting goals, working toward them, executing, and just...
In every area.
I did that with social skills. And if you're the one person who's not drunk by the middle of the night, like you look like a champion by then, You're like, wow, he's so thoughtful and articulate and kind. You're like, because I'm not smashed. Because there's so few things in the modern world where you actually risk real death. Yeah. yeah, statistically, I mean, humans are more or less likely to die through violence now than any time in human history.
And yet we're getting all swept up, aren't we? That
yeah,
everything's
totally.
coming to an end.
Everyone's so stressed about terrorism and stressed about war and stressed about conflict, and yet, statistically, you're less likely to be harmed than you ever have been.
Yeah. And then another quote of yours that I liked about it. So doubt is precursor to fear.
That I think is really true. I think that it's easy for fear to creep in if you just don't know what's going to play out. I think doubt, when you start questioning, you start second guessing. I mean, that's when you get really afraid. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the really important thing with visualization is to play through all the different scenarios so that you have less room for your imagination to run wild. So that you don't. So you don't start doubting things like, I don't know, what if this happened? What if that happened? If you've already thought through all those different what ifs, I think there's less room to be afraid. So my other biggest thing with fear, a lot of people talk about overcoming fear, and I think that's useful for some things when you just have to take the plunge or, like diving into cold water. You're like, I don't want to, it'll be afraid, but you just have to do it. But in a bigger sense, you basically just have to broaden your comfort zone until something isn't scary anymore. And that was the whole case with El Cap, is that it's too big and too difficult for me just to take a plunge. I can't just decide like, okay, I'm going to do it. I can't get psyched up, listen to a bunch of rock music and be like, here I go, and then start. Yeah. You have to be focused on it for a long time. So the only way to do that is to actually get to the point where it's just not that scary. That's the whole systematically broadening your comfort zone. I mean, that's the person in the pub day in, day out, speaking to strangers, slowly getting more and more comfortable to the point where it's not scary to talk to strangers anymore.
Yeah, so a guy who walks into a pub, day one, nervous wreck, by incrementally pushing himself each day, by day 365, he could walk in there and charm absolutely everyone. Bar staff,
and he could be
owner.
singing to the whole bar. Everyone's having a good time. He's buying drinks for the whole crew. Yeah.
Okay.
I think, and the thing is that on day one, he's overcoming fear. He's sweating. He's like, oh no, and he's just taking the plunge, to go over and talk to that first person. By day 30, he's still a little bit afraid, but it's less scary. And then eventually, and then at some point he's talked to men and to women and to old people and to young people. He's talked to everybody. Now his comfort zone is huge, because he's now had all these different experiences. He's talked to really drunk people. He's talked to sober people. So it's like he's talked to everyone. He's talked to the homeless guy out front. He's talked to the full spectrum. And then now he's just comfortable and it's no longer scary at all to go into any pub and talk to anybody.
Yeah, and that's mastery.
Yeah, I think so.
And then you talk about sort of mastery and perfection, and that's you did it on a silly scale, silly epic scale, like this superhuman feat, but that's what it is broken down, right?
Well, I mean, I think that I've gone through exactly that process of chatting, as a professional climber over years, having to give slideshows, having to do interviews, do things like that. I mean, me as a 16-year-old couldn't have this conversation. Sure. It would have been a disaster. But through 15, 20 years of practice is starting to feel more comfortable.
So the systematic
might still be a disaster, but but listeners can judge.
So the systematic approach, that's the key to it.
I think that's the real key. I mean, the systematic approach is the key for mastery.
Yeah.
I mean, just taking the plunge, overcoming fear will get you through certain situations. But yeah, I mean, the long-term approach for mastery is the real
bit by bit.
Yeah.
So think long term.
Yeah, I think that's the real way.
They say people overestimate how much they can achieve in a month, but underestimate how much they can achieve in 10 years, or a variation.
Yeah, for sure.
Thereof.
Yeah, no, I think that's super true.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. As I said, this film is jaw-dropping, and Alex's achievement is genuinely superhuman. You'll never see anything like it. Alex, it's a genuine treat for me to meet you and to chat with you, and I hope we've done fear a bit of justice.
I think this is a very honest exploration of fear and anxiety, and I mean, I think everybody worries about this kind of stuff, and it's because it's so universal. I mean, everybody feels fear, and it's something that everyone has to deal with.